talking about journeys, destinations, culture, adventure, gear, conservation, and all the things we haven't yet thought of. This episode is brought to you by Sunwear Solar Technology, a premium manufacturer of fixed and portable solar panels for overlanding vehicles and marine applications. Designed and manufactured in Germany, Sunwear panels are tested under the harshest environmental conditions to ensure rugged reliability for years to come. Trust Sunwear for your solar energy needs, no matter where your adventures take you. Check out their website at sunwear.solar. You'll find the link in the description below. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. The summer break is over, and At Overland Europe is back in the studio. And joining me is Stephan Fischer, also known by his YouTube handle, All Off-Road 4x4. Stefan describes himself as a lifelong adventure seeker and explorer with one goal: to live life to the fullest and unlock the adventure and freedom that still exists in the great, remote and beautiful land of Australia. And yes, I did read that off of a crib sheet. I'm interested to learn some of Stefan's thoughts about travelling in Australia's outback. After all, Australia is one enormous plot of land with a small population concentrated mainly in the urban areas along the eastern, southeastern and southern seaboard. That certainly means there's a lot of empty space for great overland travel, but then again, being so far away from civilization isn't without a certain degree of risk. Let's see what he's got to say. Stefan, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mike. Thanks for having me.
So I think we've got quite a lot to talk about today. But I think to begin with, the first thing would be if you can tell people who you are, what you do. Because originally you were born in Germany, I believe, and
correct,
moved to Australia much later. So maybe you can give us a little bit of background about yourself and, how you got into overlanding.
Yeah, good question. Quite an interesting pathway to get in there. I was born in Germany and always traveled a lot from a very early age, all over Europe, 2-3 times a year. So was very versed in traveling, I guess, from an early age. We also did some camping in Europe in the early days. When I got a bit older, I was interested to see outside of Europe. So I also did a lot of traveling there, from Africa to South America to a lot of Asian countries. So a lot of traveling. And I also was always a big martial art fan. And I started martial art when I was fairly young, was 5 years old. And while I did apprenticeship for sales in Germany, it didn't really gel very much with me. And I then decided to make my hobby my job, and had 7 or 8, can't remember really, it's now quite some time ago, Wing Chun schools, martial arts schools in Europe, or in Germany, not in Europe. But that all was kind of a franchise license system, and there wasn't that much opportunity anymore. And then a friend of mine said, why don't you go to Australia? I thought, I haven't been in Australia. At the time, I thought it's always warm here. I learned the other way, or I learned that was not the case later on. And so I spoke with my Sifu at the time, my master, or the head of the organization. He said, we don't have anyone in Australia. Please do. So I flew to Australia, and it sounds silly. That was actually at the time still with Olympic Airways, 1995. So you couldn't see the neighbor in front of you because of the cigarette smoke. So it were different times. I think the year later, they actually went bust. And it sounds silly, but I arrived in Australia. I stepped on the tarmac. There were no gangways and so on. You still had to go the stairs down. And I knew I'd stay here. And that's what I did. Did martial art here, and had the biggest martial art organization here in Australia, one of the biggest. And probably 10 years ago. I'm very bad with time, so in timeline, so don't quote me there exactly in that regards. But after 40 years of martial art, and that being really my life pretty much for the longest time I can remember, my body started to not agree that much anymore with all the training. I, in my peak time, used to train 8 hours a day. I used to work as a bouncer. I had a security company specialized in personal protection in Germany. That was all. I decided it was time for something else. And, I love adrenaline. I always loved nature and traveling. And a friend of mine on a camping trip, I had no clue about camping. We stayed in the caravan park and not no clue about camping. Put it like this, I hadn't camped for at least 10 years.
Yep.
Probably longer, actually. And we just wanted to see whether we liked that again. And he flicked me a four-wheel drive magazine. And I never was a car buff. I mean, I had nice, fast cars in Germany, but I've never been under a car. I can drive him well, but I never looked after him. And he flicked me a magazine, and I read that four-wheel drive magazine and was flabbergasted what you can do with these cars. And my nature is usually if I do something, I do it properly. So I think 4 weeks later, I bought a four-wheel drive. Didn't have much clue at the time, so it was a Land Rover Discovery 3.
Okay.
Which, at the time, I thought that's brilliant. Actually, it was not a bad car. And joined the local four-wheel drive club. And spent all of a sudden a lot of time four-wheel driving. Modified that Discovery 3 to, at the time it was, to the absolute max in regards from tires, bull bars, touring, and so on. And started then actually also filming myself or YouTube, really with the intention only to do it for myself because I wanted to learn from my mistakes. So I filmed especially the technical driving parts to see where I could go better. And that evolved a little bit. My family, most of my family is in Germany, or all of my family, beside my wife and my kids. So I could share with them a little bit the adventures here. And at the same time, then I decided to get out of martial art because of physical reasons and health reasons, and to really do something else. I had a web development company as well, but again, that really developed out of the martial art because we were one of the very early ones to have a website. That must have been 1997 or so. So the internet was in its infancies.
Yes.
And I employed some people who could do that for me. I'm not a developer, never been. But then people asked, hey, you had someone who did your website. Can't they do that for us? And that all developed. And so I had that next to it. And that then was all sold. And I early retired, kind of. And the YouTube channel really became then, a bit more of a hobby, I'm very fortunate. I have 2 kids. I have a very understanding wife. So that's very good. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And I can travel a lot. So that's what I'm doing for the past, I would say, 10 years, nearly 11 years. But doing something proper. I then did a lot of education, learn how to become a trainer. I became an assessor for the New South Wales Four-Wheel Drive Association, trainer and assessor, and did pretty much all the recognized courses you could do. Also had a passion for technical driving, which I developed fairly quickly. So I love the touring, I love the nature part, but I also like the thrill of technical four-wheel driving, rock climbing, kind of, but with road legal cars, which are, engineered and stretched to the maximum what you can do. A lot of people don't understand that part and think it's a waste, but I really love it. And to be honest, I think it aided me a lot in my touring part, because I do a lot of very remote touring where we sometimes days from the next discernible track not to mention any civilization. Because obviously, if you do pretty intensive rock climbing and this stuff, you really learn how to risk management. Because our group, we really call it technical driving. It's not just putting the foot down and making or breaking something. It's rather the opposite. It's a bit like chess. And we try to do that obviously with a minimum of damage to the environment and to the nature. So we have that always in mind. But it gives me gave me a very good risk assessment, knowing the vehicle, knowing what you can and can't do. And I think that's why with all the traveling I do and with many different groups and people, we had very little serious incidents, really.
Yeah. Wow. So if I roll back a little bit, or not a little bit, but right to the beginning, your traveling and outdoor experiences were sort of introduced to you by your parents, I suppose.
Yes.
In the very beginning.
From a very young age, yeah.
And as you matured, as you mentioned earlier on, you traveled to Africa and other continents. But that was then more as a tourist, because at that point you weren't driving a 4x4s.
No 4x4 at all. So really, I mean, in Australia, I think the first 4-wheel drive I purchased was a Hilux.
Mm-hmm.
2000 Hilux, I think. Still the most reliable car. I had that thing for an SR5 for 6 years, and I don't think I did anything on that car beside doing the service. But to be honest, I didn't have a clue about 4-wheel driving. I think I would have put that in low range maybe once. So I had no clue. And yeah, so actually we sold that then and had normal sedans and stuff like that. And then we decided to get into camping again. So we needed another 4-wheel drive.
Mm-hmm.
And that was then the Discovery 3.
How long did you hang on to that for?
Not that long, probably 2.5 years, I would say.
Okay.
And I mean, it was good. It surprised a lot of people because, Land Rover, you hate them or you love them, or in my case, or in many cases, you probably do both. It's always a love-hate relationship.
Yes, that's
it.
Yeah,
exactly. But it's certainly not very, I'd say, popular nowadays in Australia. It was in the earlier days.
Mm-hmm.
And when I rocked up in my 4-wheel drive club at the time, or the club I joined then to learn 4-wheel driving, yeah, there were quite a few laughs and,
the pessimist.
He's not going to go any. Yes, there wasn't much trust in it. But look, I learned fairly quickly. As I said, if I do something, I do it very intense.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it surprised quite a few people where I took that car. I still remember one trip in the sales, fairly technical stuff. That was the first real issue where my rear link arm broke. And we were just ascending a fairly steep climb out of a deep valley, where people in bad weather actually have spent 4, 5, 6 days and need to be rescued out, because you can get in, but you're not going to get out if it rains. Mind you, we didn't have any rain, but all of a sudden I hear from the back, "Hey, do you have 4-wheel drive steering?" And I said, "No, why?" "Why? Because one of your rear wheels points in the wrong direction."
Ouch.
Ouch, yes. And that was on a Saturday, if I remember right. So that was definitely interesting, and my first introduction that actually things can go wrong there. So on a fairly steep hill, we secured the car with a winch, and then it was pretty much a 3 or 2.5 day ordeal to get out there. By Sunday, then everyone left, but one guy stuck to me. Thanks a lot still. And we then managed to get a kind of fitting bolt, which didn't really had the right thread, but it fitted in. So it had to be tightened every 4 or 5 kilometers. And my mechanical knowledge is certainly probably the biggest lack of knowledge I have, because simply for 30 years, I've never done anything on a car. Everything went to the mechanic. And even today, I mean, I have a rudimentary knowledge. I know how to fix things if I have to, but that part I really don't really enjoy, I'd say. But yeah, we had to take everything apart. We took pictures and managed to get it all back together and managed to drive out there. So that was my first kind of adventure into if things go wrong.
Learning by doing.
Learning by doing. Exactly. Yes. What I do have though is and that's I guess why I got into reviewing and so on the products a bit. I usually find faults fairly quickly with any product, which I actually always saw as a curse, because it means I buy something and then I realize, oh, no, I shouldn't have. But I guess for reviewing the gear I use, it's helpful. And I have a fairly good, not necessarily understanding, but feeling if something is wrong in my car and if it doesn't behave how it should behave. And fortunately, yeah, I have good people around me, knowledgeable people, which took a long time to really find, like this in every industry.
Yeah.
And yeah, I managed, I mean, I'm doing that for 11 years now, and sometimes 50,000 kilometers a year with many different remote trips in most remote parts of Australia. And I'm still alive. I'm still here.
I think that's one of the things about Australia, because the population isn't very big, is it? It's 20-something million, I think, for the whole continent. And you've got enormous expanses of remoteness. So I think this is, as far as I see it, that you're one of the few people who are really, really lucky. I mean, you have your YouTube channel, and it started off as a hobby, but it's grown now. I mean, you've got more than 60,000 subscribers. And you're in a very strong position to test product under genuine overlanding stress and strain. So I think, in Europe, we've got cities and we don't have the remote areas you do. So I think you're very lucky from that point of view to be able to do that. And it must have been really good for your own learning curve, because being out there, if things do go wrong, you have to resolve it.
Yeah, 100%. And I got to say that again, people do not understand how big it is here. And I didn't either. We arrived here, if I go back a little bit quickly, we arrived here. I had a kind of student in Longreach, which is in far north Queensland. And we in Sydney hired a car and thought we quickly drive up there. Yeah, it wasn't a quick drive up there. And there were no roads at that time, or there were roads, but they were gravel roads. We had an old Commodore. We were freezing our butt off because it was winter, and we didn't realize it gets -4, 5, 6 at night. And we had some Aldi summer sleeping bags, no clue at the time.
Not good.
So it was a very interesting trip. And yeah, the distances here are very, very hard to understand. And exactly as you said, Mike, it's probably good that I started that a bit later in life, because with all the martial art and all these life experience, you have better risk assessment, I guess, because certainly every year people die here in Australia because they don't know what to do in certain situations, or they just make bad decisions. So it is far less forgiving here than in Europe, where if you walk long enough for half a day, you got to have somewhere a house, or not everywhere in Europe, but, Germany, UK, and the surrounding countries.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Australia in distance, it doesn't look that big on the map, but as you say, they are just, everything is far apart.
It is. And they are, and that's one of the things I love. I mean, I'm in Sydney here, and obviously I have a world city with, Opera House and Harbour Bridge and 250 kilometers of beaches alone in Sydney. Sorry, but I can drive 2 hours and I'm in the Blue Mountains, and I can get lost there and never be found again. So that is all within, 2 hours of drive. And it happens every year to tourists who get lost there. Sometimes they are found, sometimes not. And that is just on the outskirts of Sydney, really. I can see them from home,
Yeah.
the Blue Mountains. And then you have the outback, the desert. Initially, I didn't like sand driving. I just wasn't for me, and I thought the desert, the interior, and so on is boring. But I think with the desert, my good friend Dennis Patel, who passed away now, he was or is one of the, and maybe we get to talk about him another time. He is one, or was one of the, desert explorer of his time.
Mm-hmm.
He has done over 70 desert trips, but not just desert, many other things. And he said there are three types of people for the desert. The people who just want to tick off a bucket list. They just drive through the desert, they've done it, and that's the end of it. Then you have the people, and I have seen them, who go in the desert and feel completely out of their depth, because it is so isolated and it is so vast. I call it an ocean out of sand. And the Simpson Desert, for example, is the biggest parallel sand desert, sand dune desert in the world. And then you have people like Dennis, like myself, and some others who it's addictive. It's addictive. So from my first time in the desert, nearly every year, sometimes 2 or 3 times, I'm drawn back into it, and go more and more remote, spend more and more time there. And really have developed a great affinity for the Australian outback, the inland, which is, as you mentioned, very little populated.
Yeah.
And where you easy can have 400 or 500 kilometers between fuel stops, and that is on the more populated parts.
Yeah, I think this is a good opportunity to let's touch on how you prepare for that sort of journey, because we've already said Australia, vast expanse of nothing. You really do have to prepare well in advance, especially as fuel, water, etc. So, what's your tick list look like? What are all the boxes you need to go through when you're preparing for such a trip?
Yeah, look, it's funny. I probably do that a bit too long, because I know people prepare a year for a trip like this. I usually probably prepare 3 days,
Okay.
simply for give it a week. But I mean, I can be ready within 2 days or so. The benefit obviously is that my Land Cruiser is my touring vehicle, so that doesn't really do anything else. I don't use it as a daily driver.
Mm-hmm.
So that car is pretty much always packed. If I had to leave right now, I still have food, water for probably 2 weeks, always in the car. And given I do that so much, my system is fairly worked out. So I pretty much put my camera gear. That's probably the most preparation for me nowadays, to sort out all my camera gear, put that in the car. Again, I'm German, so I try to be efficient, how I do things. And I have a fairly good system there. Food-wise nowadays, for example, I have a mix of dehydrated ready food, which I only put into the started using probably 5 years ago. Some companies approached me, hey, do you want to test that? And I thought, I don't know, that dry food. But it actually tastes quite good. And I found in many instances, because even though we don't plan it, sometimes stuff just doesn't happen how it's supposed to happen. And if you come to camp late at night, if you had a very long day driving, if you had recoveries, if you had stuff like that, it pays off if you don't have to prepare a big meal, but just hot water and have a nutritious meal which fulfills you, which doesn't taste bad. So I really started to cherish that. I wouldn't want to live off it, but I always carry a few of them.
Practical.
Sorry?
It's practical.
It's practical, yes.
Yeah.
But I'm not only living off that. So my other, and again, food preparation is probably the longest, is probably what I need the most time for. I like to eat healthy, so I don't usually eat junk food in general. So for example, yesterday, because I'm leaving on Monday, just for 10 days or so, and not remote. We're going to go to Morton Island. So I think, no, don't quote me on that. It's next to Fraser Island, which is the biggest sand island in the world.
Yeah.
Morton is a little bit smaller. Doesn't have dingoes. It's not as much to see, but it's still a very nice place. And I haven't been there now for probably 10 years. So it was time to get back there. And yeah, my food preparation, for example, is now, one of my basic rules is everything needs to be one pot meal. I don't like cleaning up. Everything needs to be simple and
Yeah.
easy. So I usually, that's what I did yesterday, I purchase chicken and beef. I dice it. I pan fry it. Then I gonna kind of, well, not dry it, but make sure it's no oil on it. Then I vacuum seal it in one portion always. So it's for me between 120, 140 gram of meat. Then I put it in the freezer. To be honest, for a trip like this, I could actually just have it fresh, but it's my same routine, and especially for desert stuff where I'm 3, 4, 5 weeks away, obviously stuff needs to last. So I put that in the freezer. Then that goes in my fridge freezer in the car. I'm pretty moderate there. I only have a Bushman fridge freezer, which is 52 liters. And that's a one compartment fridge freezer. But I run that at -6, and it has three layers. And at the top layer, I pretty much can have carrots and stuff which shouldn't freeze. The second layer, I have stuff like, yogurt and so on. It would freeze after 2 or 3 days, so I have to rotate that a little bit. And then at the bottom, I have my prepared meat portion size. I used to also blanch my vegetables and cut that and buy that all. But I have actually given up on that because I just buy frozen veggies.
Yeah.
Which, are as good. I make sure it's Australian vegetables and not imported from, somewhere, but as much as I can at least. And yeah, just have frozen vegetables. And then one of the greatest discoveries I could live without is microwave rice. I love rice, so I could eat rice every day. But I don't make anything which cost excess water. So I usually don't make noodles unless they are Hokkien noodles or so, which don't need water. I wouldn't make rice because, you have water wastage, and the desert water is certainly something you can't waste. And microwave rice actually tastes very good. So meat in the pan, put some veggies in the pan, put the microwave rice in, then that can be quinoa, that can be brown rice, many varieties. And then if I feel like it, I put a little bit of sauce to it. And that is a healthy, good dinner, which I happily can live off for a few weeks.
Not bad. Not bad at all. So you're saying you're just preparing right now for a trip when you're leaving on Monday.
Yep.
Are you going as a group? Are you going alone?
No, in Australia, it is advisable to not travel alone.
Yeah.
Some people do, but alone is alone. Look, if I was a mechanic and had grown up around cars my whole life and could fix everything, maybe a bit different, but I can't. And I also enjoy company, to be honest. So this time I'm just going with one friend of mine. It was a fairly short notice. I actually should be in the desert now on a very exciting expedition, finding a new exit on the Canning, which a friend of mine had traditional owners' rights to go to traditional owners' land. So it's an awesome trip. And Alan, sorry, I'm not there. But I just couldn't with all the other stuff which is going on, because there would have been a month's trip.
Yeah.
And so, we're just heading for 10 days or so. I haven't planned exactly, with one friend. But that is fairly civilized. We drive up the coast, so there's not much remoteness there. Still beautiful though.
Nice. I envy you.
Yes, Morton, you will see some videos and some pictures. You know, you have on the western side, it's Morton Bay,
Hmm.
where you have dangoks, great whites, also turtles, many other sharks just swim past. Actually, you always have a good look before you get in the water, because it is shark territory.
Okay, I think that's
And
one of the things about Australia, that you've got a lot of creatures there which are out to kill you.
yeah, look, I always say we have everything in poisonous, you know, or wants to eat you. And I mean, I really have friends who are hesitant to come to Australia because of that. But yeah, I don't know. I'm still alive. And common sense, I mean, in general, nothing really wants to eat you. So if you have a bit common sense and know what you're doing, which I didn't know at the beginning. I mean, the first 2 or 3 years were probably a bit of draw of the luck that I survived some of the silly things we did. But you learn. And yeah, you know, I was lucky 4 years ago to come past a fear snake, most poisonous snake in the world. Very rare. Scientists go in the desert for weeks, try to find one.
Hmm.
I spotted her out of the car right away, stopped the car, went out, got the camera out, and then she settled under my car, under my driver's seat. So I had to wait a little bit before I could get in the car. I like snakes, I have to say. So yeah, Australia has everything in poison, dangerous, but you know, if you grow up with it. A friend of mine was here from Germany, and he went with my 7-year-old son in the local reserve here, and they went for a walk, and all of a sudden he started yelling and running backwards, and there was a green tree snake in front of it. My son just looks at, oh yeah, it's a green tree snake, he's all right, let's go. And um, he was beside himself because of the snake and thought he's dying in a second because the snake is going to chase him. But yeah, if you have got to have a bit of common sense, and then it's all survivable here. They usually try to avoid you.
Yeah, I think they're more afraid of us than we are of them.
They are more afraid of us, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Australia's also got an awful lot of history. The settlers came not that long ago, but you've got the Aboriginal history, etc. Do you go in search of that as well?
Yeah, that's a little bit sensitive topic. A lot of these places, unfortunately, you can't really go anymore because they're closed off now. I have many of my friends I travel with who do that much longer than I do. Some of them, yeah, do four-wheel driving here for 40, 45 years. They fortunately have seen a lot of their places. I guess I understand it in a way because they're like always people who don't treat stuff with the respect it should be treated. And yeah, I guess that caused the traditional owners to close off many of the very interesting places. But yeah, I'm very interested in that. If we find something, we certainly look at it, but in a responsible way. We only look, we maybe pick up and look at it, but we put it all back
Yeah.
where it belongs. And yeah, very interesting. But I mean, to the white history, I've grown up in Germany in a house which was 350 years at the time, so it's older than the whole Australian white history.
Yes.
Uh,
It's amazing.
you know, if you, yeah, it's crazy, you know. So yeah, but yeah, it's a lot of history here. Obviously, the indigenous history was bit more limited or less developed than in other parts of the world. That means there is not that much, unfortunately, left. I mean, you have some beautiful artwork and you have stone monuments and sacred areas and so on, but dwelling wise or stuff like that, it's not like in the US, for example, you know, where you have Navajo buildings and forts and stuff like that. But yeah, definitely, there's a lot of culture here. I think Australia is not always that good in really preserving that, unfortunately. Also, the settlers' history on top of it,
Yeah. Wow.
which is really a shame.
It is.
Europe, I think, in Europe, it's done a bit better, where this stuff is preserved. So a lot of things here, which I reckon they should be looked after, they should be, maintained, fixed. Unfortunately, it doesn't really happen that often.
That's sad, because one day it will all be gone, and then people will be saying, "Oh, what happened to all that?"
Yes, yeah. Old Andetto Station. It's on the beginning of the desert. It's an old cattle station where a lady still stayed there until the 80s or so and run that. And that was open, it's still open. They had a caretaker there and you could walk back in time. I've done a few videos about it. You go into it and everything is kept like it was for the past 40 years. The old, telegraph and the telephone with a hand, what do you call it? Hand lever or what to power it, UHF, all the little trinkets. It's amazing to go in there. After every sandstorm, the caretakers have to sweep, I don't know, a few tons of sand out of it. But that's now also abandoned and no one looks after it anymore, sadly.
That's a pity. I mean, I've seen lots of photographs from other people who've traveled through Australia, and there's all these forgotten places where it looks as if they were occupied until fairly recently, but then all of a sudden people move away and it's just left to return to nature, if you like.
Yeah, there are plenty of places like that. Nukalena Mine in the Flinders Ranges, but especially the early settlers, they had a bit funny ideas, where they could make a living. Mm-hmm. Because Australia can be very deceptive. If you come in, if you call it the wrong or the right year, and you look at it, and at the moment, for example, the desert had tons of rain. So you look at it, everything is green, and there are many places you think, oh, that's perfect here, and we're going to make a living here. And then you start settling. Unfortunately, that was the only rain in 10 years. So the next 10 years, you won't have any rain. And there are quite a few places where people thought in a good year, hey, that may be promising here. But it turned out after 3 years, no rain, it maybe wasn't such a good place. And that is obviously quite interesting then still to see, because often people just packed up and left, and you still have the colonial, the buildings and so on there. Very interesting. On the way to the desert is the Advert track, where the train line, the GAN, used to run along. And you have all the old sidings. We actually camp often in that old sidings. It's a very special place somehow. And there is still a lot of that in Australia.
It's nice that you've got the history, which you can still look at. And it's also interesting to hear that it's like on your way to when you're going out into the desert. So you're going from your urban home through history and then into nothing.
Yeah, and even that nothing. You see, people say there is nothing. And that is, I guess, why I appreciate the desert. If you really look, there's a lot of things. And we have done a lot of cross-country expeditions, desert-wise. And even in the remote desert, you find, signs of habitants. The Simpson Desert, for example, the Wangaguru people, they left the desert, I think 1900 it was. But they used to live around the desert fringes, and they used to cross the desert and walk in the desert via native wells, which are now secret, so to speak, the locations. I'm lucky that Dennis Patel, who rediscovered that wells actually probably 40 years or so ago it was, because all the locations were lost. There was an old journal from David Lindsay where he kind of marks the locations, but that was via chain, and obviously the compass directions and magnetic variation changed and so on. So universities and a few people tried to find it, but weren't very successful. And Dennis Bartel, then my buddy, he found them all again and marked all the locations, but they are kept as a secret. The indigenous owners of the land don't want really people to go there.
Sure.
Which I don't 100% understand. Some of the wells were also, as I understand, sacred places, but a lot of them were just places of habitation where there was water. But head off for the indigenous people, because I mean, it's not that you have a well there and you have all of a sudden a little oasis like you maybe think in the Sahara. A well in the indigenous sense, or especially in the Simpson Desert, means you have a depression in the ground, and then you dig a hole which could be 10 meters deep in an angle, and then you have maybe a clay bed or rock bed underneath where water collects in the rain. So you had to dig out that well, then you had to climb in there to get the water out. So it's not a well, I mean, if you see these places now, if you don't know what to look for and if you don't know where they are, you won't spot them anymore, because when the indigenous people left the desert, these wells all closed off. But having the knowledge to find these locations, because I mean, obviously you could dig in 500 million places and you don't find a drop of water. But for them to find that few places where you can get water, and there are, I think, around 11 or 12 wells around there, is amazing, They're very, very, very adapted to obviously live in that country and do that quite well,
Yeah. I mean, you're sort of an explorer. So when you're going out into the desert, first of all, how much water do you have in the vehicle? And what opportunities do you have to replenish that when you've left civilization?
Look, civilization, you always have pockets of civilization. I mentioned Old Advert, for example. Now it is abandoned. We don't have water, but they actually had access to the water table directly. A lot of the water you can get doesn't taste very good. Because it's very sulfury, but they actually had still have probably, but you need a pump to get to it, the best water in the area. So you can get water. I mean, you have Mount Dare at the beginning of the desert, Birdsville on the other side of the desert. You can get water there. But depending, I mean, if we are for 3 weeks in the desert, water-wise, I'm very frugal. I mean, on a normal day where we drive, and obviously we're not in the desert is closed in summer. I've been on the fringe season there. The German university, actually, they chose that far too late. They tried to break a world record for a solar crossing, and I worked a little bit for them as an advisor. But that was from memory, end of September or early October, and we had to abandon it because we had 50 degrees, and they had 20 Germans with them, which weren't really that well prepared, and people started fainting and other issues. It could have gone, it didn't. Everything went okay at the end, but that was one of the situations where if stuff would have gone wrong, it could have been really bad, because we had 50 degrees. 49 degrees in the desert. Oof. And together with the hot wind, it just sucks every moisture out of you.
Yeah.
But coming back to your question, so in general, I can probably live on a normal day, not on a 50-degree day, with around 2.5 to 3 liters a day, including everything.
That's actually not too bad, really. But so what's your onboard reserve? How much do you actually have with you?
I have a 45-liter water tank on top of my fuel tank. So that is well protected. Then, especially for remote desert trips, I carry, depending on how much fuel I need, I carry at least another 20 liters of water in a jerry at the back. And then I would probably carry another 20 liters of water in the car. But that is usually just commercial. In Australia, you buy these caskets.
Yeah.
It's cardboard boxes, actually, with a aluminium, like the cheap wine, with the aluminium bag in. But even that is funny. If you buy them in the city, and we had that, you can't go remote with them because they rub through because they're so thin. If you buy them in the remote communities, they have double the thickness, so they will last you much longer. So that are all the little things you find out over time.
You probably had a bad experience with that then.
I didn't, but a friend of mine had on the canning trip, yes, where you have 18, it's the longest remote trek you probably can do in the world, I nearly say.
Wow.
It's 1,800 kilometers. It's an old stock route. And it's 1,800 kilometers of nearly constant corrugation with a few dunes thrown in. And it's not technically very difficult, but you have two local communities in the middle, very small communities. You never know what you get there. Until a few years ago, you needed fuel drops actually via airplane. Nowadays, the communities have fuel, so you can fuel up there. But yeah, after 4 or 5 days of corrugation, all of a sudden half of his water was gone because the plastic bags rubbed through. So yeah, and he had a wet boot.
Not good.
No, we learned the hard way. A lot of little things. I always call it bush mode, and even now it still takes me a day or two. I really have to tell myself, once you out there, you can't have a city mindset. You can't just do things. You have to think about what you do. You have to consider the consequences. You can't leave your tap just a little bit open and it's dripping the whole night and your water is gone. Everything you do, you have to consider. And really got to be in the moment. Usually it takes me 2 or 3 days to get into what I call desert mode, where I'm really then back in tune and think twice before I do something.
Yeah, as I say, you do all your preparation, preparing your vehicle, your stocks, whatever you want to take with you. And now you're also saying you take 2 days to sort of get your mindset correct. So everything is then, you think about things properly, probably 2 or 3 times before you're actually doing something.
Yeah, ideally you should, especially if it's, we did a remote desert crossing, very remote, out of helicopter range. So the only way to get in and out is by ourselves, group of 6 vehicles. And if you look on the map of the Australian interior and you don't know Australia, you think that's got to be a beautiful country because there's river after river and creek after creek. The problem is they have water once every 50 years, if. So on the map, it all looks out, oh yeah, I have water there, I have water there, I have water there. In reality, there's nothing. Oh, very little. And on that particular crossing, we needed to cross one of the dry rivers, or many of the dry rivers, but one, we were a bit sketchy. And we tried to get around it, but obviously you only have that much fuel. You can't do detours of 100 kilometers or so. So we had to go through it and it all looked fine. We have metal rods to test, but as soon as the first car was in, it pretty much just sank. So we needed 3 cars to get 3 winches on and winch that car back out. So that wasn't my trip and I wasn't the leader there. I wouldn't have done that particular drive. But anyway, that is all stuff where you really have to think what you're doing, because if you lose your car there, it's probably going to stay there forever, especially in one of that dry creek beds. If you break through that top layer, underneath is salty mesh. And that was certainly interesting. There's a video about that, by the way.
I will check that one out. Right, let me just go back to the desert, because you've done, or you do courses for sand driving, don't you?
Yeah, at the moment, not so much. I worked as a driver trainer for a few commercial operators. I started getting my licensing and training in the various four-wheel drive clubs. I used to be quite active in the New South Wales Four-Wheel Drive Association and used to work there as a driver trainer and assessor. But yeah, at the moment, I don't really do much training anymore. Because I don't have the time. You really have to do it in a way, or not full time. Australia is heavily over-regulated, if I can say that, in many instances. So yeah, if you can't just train, you pretty much need to be together with the RTO, which is the Registered Training Organization. If you want to do that yourself, it's too much effort unless it's really a full-time job for you. So at the moment, I don't. If people here and there have people who want private, who go for a desert trip and want to learn a day private or so, I do that. But otherwise, I don't really teach much there publicly.
But you do work with people who want an adventure, who want to go out and see stuff. I think, is it correct to say that you do guided tours as well?
At the moment, not.
Okay.
Again, because of all the bureaucracy, I planned to do that in a bigger scale with a friend of mine 4 or 5 years ago. But again, the bureaucracy you need was too much. However, I mean, I am available if people want a fixer, want a local guide in Australia. I mean, they do the tour, but I just accompany them and, advise where I can, and certainly can make suggestions. But I should have been at the Cape and now in the Kimberley with a friend of mine who has a touring company. And from next year on, the idea is that I'm going to do 2 or 3 tours a year for him because he has all the requirements. And I wouldn't want to do it for a living. I think everything you do on a constant base, it loses the fun.
Yeah.
If it becomes a job. But I'd love to do it, a few trips a year, 100%. And yeah, we were supposed to actually catch up at the Cape now and see how we work together and how that all goes, and then start tours from next year. So we have to delay that now a little bit. But I hope that works because I think he's a bit younger than me, but an ex-helicopter pilot in the bush, and cool dude. So we spoke quite a few hours now, and we seem to have the same values there and aligned pretty well. So I'm looking forward, hopefully, from next year on to offer a few tours a year under his umbrella.
Okay.
And yeah, that should be exciting because if you know where to go, it's Australia, it's such a big country. If you haven't traveled a lot, you still see interesting things, but the things people like me have seen are the things which you probably don't see as normal tourists, or you definitely wouldn't see as a normal tourist, So we can show you a bit, special places, so to say.
Okay. Well, let me sort of pick up on that a little bit, because Australia is a fascinating continent. And a lot of people do like to take their own vehicles there and then go out and explore. I think we've already established that can be quite risky. What would you advise, or do you have any tips for people who are planning to embark on an expedition of their own into Australia? So let's say they're coming from Europe. Are there any particular tips which you give them in advance to say, make sure you prepare for this?
I mean, Australia is so big, you have areas which look like the Swiss Alps. You have rainforests like, the jungles of Borneo.
Mm-hmm.
You have deserts like, deserts, Sahara, but with dunes. You have stone gib deserts, which are just stone based, where you have hundreds of kilometers only pebbles, nothing else. So it really depends on where you're going to go in Australia. The only thing I can say, and again, we hear it every year that people die here or need to be rescued. Whatever you think, unless you're a very experienced traveler and have probably done Australia, whatever you think, you're probably wrong.
Okay.
That is my advice. Because it's hard to imagine if you have not seen it. And I think it's often hard to imagine the dangers. And I don't want to, over dramatize stuff here. But if you get it wrong, it can have serious consequences. And it's not too difficult to get it wrong,
Yeah.
So I would say, learn four-wheel. I mean, if you want to go off-road, if you stay on the tar and so on, I think you're reasonably safe. Make sure you always have fuel, water in the car. Make sure you have a PLB. I mean, anyone who travels in Australia outside of the main cities, you should have a personal locator beacon with you. And in my opinion, an iPhone also is no substitute for that. The new iPhones with the satellite thing, that's maybe a backup device, but a PLB in the glove box should be. I would recommend to always have at least 3-4 days of water. Always have food in the car, and never leave your car. I mean, you should never say never, but in general, if you break down, if you're stranded somewhere, you stay by the car and don't just walk off unless you exactly know 5 kilometers in that direction. And I learned that the hard way as well. I don't know whether we have time. I used to go pig hunting here a bit in the early days.
Pig hunting?
Still go from time. Yes.
Wild pigs.
Wild pigs, yes, wild pigs. And a friend of mine had a property in Ningen. It's so 8 hours from here. It's outback New South Wales. And that wasn't that big, 100 acres, 200 acres, but next to it were 250,000 acres. And we've been there a few times. That's probably 10, 11, 12 years ago. And I arrived there with another friend. We thought, we go for a quick walk. We jumped over the fence into a neighbor's property. It was winter. I had my dogs. Yeah, we used to hunt with dogs, but I left my dogs actually at the hut where he grew up. Old homestead, no power. You still had an oven to have hot water and heating and everything, or donkey. We quickly jumped over the fence, and I always pride myself that I have a pretty good orientation sense. And we split up. He followed some pig tracks. I followed some pig tracks, and I was sure he was lost. But it turned out he wasn't lost. I was lost.
Oh.
And it started to get dark, and that was before my four-wheel drive time, to be honest. So I had definitely far less experience then. And I thought, I'm sure in which direction I need to go. It wasn't the right direction. To cut a long story short, I came to one track, started walking in the wrong direction, didn't have a PLB, and was lucky that probably the only car which drive past there in a week came past that were also a few pig hunters, and they saw me with a rifle, and they then dropped me back off close to where I were. But otherwise, it is very easy to get lost, because once you're in the bush, everything looks the same. And at that time, I didn't pay that much attention to sun and navigation, really. I just thought, I'm going to be okay. It's just over the fence. But yeah, it wasn't. And at night, you have, -3-4 degrees there in winter. It gets freezing cold. Only had a T-shirt on. I already thought about, doing the Star Wars, shooting me a kangaroo and lying in the carcass out kangaroo to keep me warm. So I was a little bit planning ahead, but fortunately that wasn't needed. But after that, I never went out bush again without a basic pack with water, with supplies, with the PLB. That's when I purchased the PLB after that.
Yes, that's the sort of excitement you can probably do without.
Yes, if you make it out, it's a good, and if you learn from it, it's a good learning experience. But, that's exactly the stuff which very easy can go wrong. If that car wouldn't have come down there, and he said himself, that road goes 80 kilometers to one homestead, so nothing else in the bush. If he wouldn't have come past there, no one else would have come past there. It would have been a bit more interesting.
Yeah. What I've certainly learned today is that you have to have an awful lot of respect for Australia. And I'm not talking about the wild animals and the creatures which are out to get you, but you can make fatal mistakes.
Yes, you need to respect country 100%. And if you take that lightly, if you think you are better, so to speak, than country, and you know it better, that's you gotta work with it and understand it and respect it. If you don't, you can put yourself into a lot of trouble there. That's for sure.
Yeah. Wow. All right. I'd like to sort of slow down or bring today to an end slowly. I mean, you've got your preparations. Monday's only a couple of days away. And
Yeah.
maybe we can agree right now that when you come back from your trip, that we can talk about it and you can tell us what you've been up to, what you experienced, and some of the highlights and maybe also some of the unexpected adventures.
Yeah, would love to. Definitely.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot.
See you along the treks. See ya.
Thanks for tuning in to the At Overland Europe podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and download our app for more adventures and exclusive content. Remember, you can find our guest social media and websites linked in the description below. Until next time, safe travels.